Hi everyone, welcome back to English 124, Writing About Literature. We are in week 8 and we are looking at the elements of poetry. So kind of like we did with the short fiction, we looked at how to write about short fiction first, and then we looked at the elements so that you would have kind of an understanding about the ways in which we construct literary arguments. And here we did kind of the same thing. I hope you have, after last week, a better understanding of how to explicate or analyze a poem. And now we're going to look at some of those poetic elements. So I have 2 lectures for you, part 1 and 2 of poetry terms and poetic elements that I'd like you to look at. And then we have some selected poems. So I tried with the poems this week to find kind of, I think that My Last Duchess that we looked at last time is not as user-friendly, I'll put it that way, which is one of the reasons I had a whole lecture where I talked about it so you could kind of see what that looked like. But I wanted poems that were a little bit more easy to understand, but also more diverse. So we start with, in our selection, we have The Terrorist He Watches, which is by a Polish poet, and we have a point of view basically of a terrorist waiting for a bomb to go off. And so it's almost structured like a narrative where we're anticipating what's going to happen, and some conflict and tension build up throughout the poem. Then we have the poem Cups by a friend of mine, and we see a woman talking about different kind of a symbolism of her life in different types of cups. So we have her father, her husband, and then her 2 children, and a number of literary devices, particularly alliteration, assonance. So some of those things I'd like you to look for as you're reading. The Haunted Oak by Paul Laurence Dunbar is a story that, it's a poem that again kind of tells a story. It's an oak tree that's seen a victim, and what that means and what type of victim is something that I'm going to leave for your reading of it, because I think it's quite a powerful poem. I Too by Langston Hughes. I Too Sing America. He talks about being basically the African-American experience at this point. I think he was writing it in the 1930s during the Harlem Renaissance. So you can kind of think about some of those historical details. What Lips My Lips Have Kissed and Where and Why by Edna St. Vincent Millay features a female persona. Persona is the person narrating the poem or speaking the poem. And the woman in the poem is considering the lovers that she had when she was young, and how now she's old and she can barely remember them, but she wants that spring to sing inside of her again. And then we have Bilingual by a Hispanic poet, where she talks about speaking 2 languages at home and her love for English and for literature and for writing and poetry, and how that was difficult for her father. So that poem is also, as all of these are, there is a persona, a person speaking the poem, but I think it's a little bit more personal than some of the other poems that we have. So hopefully a nice group, a little bit less for you guys to read because poems are shorter, but I'm hoping that you will enjoy them and read them maybe a few times, especially whichever one you decide to read and analyze. So the journal for this week, again, like the journals when we had the short fiction, it's kind of practice for your paper later on, and you're going to be choosing one of those 6 poems that I just talked about and writing an analysis. So working off of the notes I gave you last week about how to explicate a poem, and the notes from this week about the poetic and literary terms and elements and things that authors use in poems in order to convey their meaning. So I look forward to seeing your interpretations, and that's it. Have a great week. Thanks.